I think we are going to start. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming to our Epidemiology Biostat seminar, sponsored by the Value Institute and the Center and the CTR, our ACCEL CTR. We are extremely lucky today to have Suzanne McCahan from Nemours to come and give us a presentation about REDCap. REDCap is a new data entry, data management system that we've been working on under the guidance of Suzanne and several other people at Nemours. So Suzanne is a research scientist at Nemours Biomedical Research Group, and she's also an assistant professor at Thomas Jefferson Medical College. She has been instrumental in creating with Team Bunnell the Bioinformatics Core Facility, and she's also a very active and accomplished basic scientist studying juvenile idiopathic arthritis and some rare genetic disorders using microarrays and sequencing and global gene expression to study all this. So we are really, I'm very impressed, and we are very lucky to have you to talk about REDCap. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. I don't know how close I need to stand to the mic. Can everybody hear me? No. Yes. I have to pretend I don't have a mic. And the slides are being projected, Seraphy? Okay. All right. So thank you for the introduction. This is an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Mostly, I'm going to give tips on things that I see people running into a lot. I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I see people have problems with, but I'm going to try to cover the most common kinds of things and some of the things that are less readily seen within REDCap. So I'm going to start with an overview of REDCap. Then I'm going to talk about tips when you're to keep in mind when you're designing projects, tips for using surveys, some of the data security features that are in REDCap, and then I'll finish with some functions that are convenient for REDCap users to know about. So most of you probably already know that REDCap is a secure web application for data management. It allows users to build and manage online surveys and databases. The REDCap projects can have a variety of purposes. They can be basic clinical, translational, and behavioral research. Data for repositories can be stored in REDCap, and it can also be used for operational support. REDCap, there are many REDCap installations in the world, actually. I'm going to be talking about two of those installations. Each installation has a separate independent user accounts and separate projects. So if you have logins to two different REDCap installations, you will most likely have different projects in those different installations. There is an installation for the DE-CTR, and ACCEL-related projects can be created within this installation of REDCap. And it's intended for use by DE-CTR members and their collaborators. We have an online request form that can be used if you want to request a REDCap user account. There's also a Nemours installation that is for Nemours-related projects. Nemours associates and their collaborators are welcome to request REDCap accounts, and they can use this URL to request a REDCap account on that installation. People can have user accounts on both installations. These installations are administered by the Nemours Bioinformatics Core, and specifically Tim Bunnell, Chris Pennington, and I work on REDCap itself. The CTR also has member institutions that have installations as well. Christiana has an installation, University of Delaware has one, and so does the Medical University of South Carolina. So REDCap has many sources of help built into it. There is a training resources tab that when you first log in, you will see a set of tabs. There's one called Training Resources that has a list of numerous tutorial videos. We always recommend that new users watch the first 2 videos in this list. They're both overviews. They're very good and give you a real sense of how to use REDCap, how to navigate through. There is another tab called Help and Frequently Asked Questions tab, and why am I getting feedback? In this tab, you will find many questions, frequently asked questions about how to use REDCap and answers. Within REDCap, when you go to different pages, there is context-specific help. You will find text right within the page. This is an example of some text, which you can't read, but watch for text within the pages when you're using REDCap. There are also buttons that are question marks. If you hover over them within REDCap, it will give you some information about the information about what's on that page. And also there will be links. And this is an instance where there's a link to the relevant tutorial in the Training Resources tab that will show you how to use that page. There are also links that take you to sections within the frequently asked questions that will give you very helpful information about that specific function that you're trying to use. If you don't find the answer to your question in these 3 resources, you can email redcap@dectr.org or redcap@nemoursresearch.org, depending on the affiliation, which REDCap installation you're using, and we can help you figure out what it is that you want to do. So these are the basic steps when you start a REDCap project. You want to plan your study, and you want to be familiar with the data that you want to collect. You create a new project, and that project is in development status. After you create the project, you can create forms and surveys and fields, and you'll want to enter test data to make sure that everything that is in the design of your database is behaving the way you want it to. Once you have it behaving the way you want it to, you want to request that the project be moved to production. After you do that, Chris or I will check your project and suggest changes to you if they're appropriate. And when the data is moved to production, when the project is moved to production, all of the data within the project will be deleted. And that's to help protect you from corrupting your data while you are creating your database and adding data to it. So once the project is in production, you want to begin entering real data. There is a process for making design changes to a project that's in production if it's needed, and I'll talk more about the specifics of that process later. When you're within REDCap and you have data in your project that's in production, you can use a data quality module to check your data to see if you have missing data, to see if any of the fields within the data within fields is incorrect, of the incorrect type of data that's expected to be there. You can also use reports to view your data and everything stays within REDCap. You can export your data and analyze it in statistical software, and REDCap allows you to export in several formats. SPSS and SAS and R are some of those formats. So it's ready to be imported right into a statistical package. Now I'm going to talk about some tips on designing projects. When you design a project within REDCap, you can do that right within REDCap and do it with the online designer. This is a web page interface, and it's really good for less experienced REDCap users. It's all click and type kind of interface, and all the options and things that you can do are right there with you, for you. You can also use a data dictionary, and using a data dictionary is very useful if you want to check a lot of your fields at one time, because you can see more of the data of the design in a spreadsheet format. You can compare attributes between fields that are on different instruments, which is very difficult to, well, actually impossible to do with the online designer. You can easily move fields from one instrument to another. And the process for making changes with the data dictionary is to download the data dictionary from within REDCap, and then open that CSV file with a text editor or Excel, and then make your changes, and then save the file as a CSV file, and then import the data dictionary into REDCap. And then any changes that you've made to the data dictionary will be imported into your project in REDCap. Now I have a few slides on some general best practices. It's a good idea to keep your forms short. I've seen people where the form just keeps scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and that gives you a chance to lose data. Somebody could have entered half of the field, get a phone call, and then not get back to REDCap, and REDCap times out, and they could have to re-enter that data all over again. So if you have saved the form, even though it's not complete, you can save it, then you avoid that. But if you have short forms, it takes less time to enter data, and if for some reason you don't save that data, you have lost less of your work. It's good to keep the field names short. If you are exporting the data and importing them into statistical packages, many of those packages don't like long field names. So REDCap will warn you if you have a field name that's long, and it will allow you to keep that field name, but if it warns you that it's too long, it's a good idea to shorten it. It's good to use clear descriptive field labels so that when somebody is entering data into REDCap, they have a good idea of what that data is that you're supposed to put into that field. You always want to define your values. You ask for age. Okay, so is it age in months? Is it age in years? Is it age in days? It depends on the project as to what that is. So define the units for the values that you're collecting. And there's a little spot for a field note, which can be handy for adding field labels, and because that shows up right underneath the field where data will be added. And you want to validate text fields whenever possible. So when you have a text field, you can set REDCap so that it only allows a date to be entered, or an email address, format for an email address, or a phone number, zip code, just a number or an integer could be allowed in a text field. And defining what it is, what the format of the data is that you expect, will help reduce the chance of data entry errors. So instead of using text fields, if you can use a multiple choice field, that's even better. It reduces the chance of data entry errors, typo errors, and if you don't know what all the choices that somebody might be using, you can also include an option of other, and then have some branching logic that allows a second field to be shown where you collect what other is. If you are collecting data with 2 units, it's best to try to use 2 fields to do that. So if you're looking at something, say, 1 year and 4 months, if you have a text field and you're asking people to give you this length of time, and some will put in 1 year and 4 months, some will put in 1 YR, 4 MO. There are all kinds of formats that you can get. But if you split this into 2 years and in your project, in your field label, describe I want the year part of this and just validate it as an integer. You're looking for a number, so then people can only enter the year, collect the month in another field and ask for months and require it to be 0 to 12. And then they can only put in the numbers. And then when the data comes out and the statisticians want to look at it, they don't have to fix it all before they actually do anything with it. Another thing that we've had that's kind of interesting is somebody has had a survey where they were asking people to type the year in, and somehow it was the people were in Spanish and they weren't really understanding what the error messages were that were popping up, and they just put in some text instead of a year. So in that case, it was helpful to have a drop-down box with all of the years that were possible and have somebody choose the year. And when you're coding the values in your field, you can actually use a number like 2000 to code. You don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 or A, B, C. In the back end, you can put in 2000, and in the front end, you can also have it show 2000. When you have a multiple choice field, it's a good idea to include options like none, not available, do not know, do not care to answer, whatever is appropriate for your question and your data. This helps avoid missing data. If the field is empty, you don't know whether somebody skipped it by accident or whether they didn't have the answer or they just don't want to answer that question. So if you have those choices there, that means that you don't have data that's missing. You don't have to go and try to find that data. You want to try to code well, you don't want to try. You want to code answers in multiple choice fields the same way throughout the whole project. If you have yes/no questions and you're using REDCap's yes/no field type, no is going to be coded as 0, and yes is going to be coded as 1. If you have a multiple choice field that you decide you want to say no, yes, maybe, code no as 0 and yes as 1, so that when the data gets analyzed in the end, no is always meaning 0, and it makes it easier to analyze and results in fewer errors. REDCap has calculated fields. These are nice for when you actually want to see a calculated value within REDCap or within the data collection instrument, but it's actually better not to use calculated fields if you don't have to. You have to visit the data entry page or the survey and save it or submit it for that data, those calculated values to be stored in REDCap. You will see a value in your screen, but it won't be put into the database until you save it. And then if any of the input values change, you need to save that form again to save the new calculated value in the database. So there is a use for calculated fields in REDCap, but you want to use them sparingly. The other thing that you cannot do is have one calculated field depend on another calculated field. If you want to do that, you would have 2 separate fields, and the second field would have the whole calculation in it, not refer to another calculated field. I like to put fields that have PHI in a separate instrument all by themselves. And this is because REDCap, you can access, you can control the level of user access to instruments. So if all of the PHI is in one form, you can have some of your users seeing the PHI and others not seeing the PHI. The first field of a project shouldn't be in the instrument with PHI if that's what you want to use that form for, because the first field of a project is the record identifier or the primary key for the database, and the name of it can be anything, but every user has to have access to that field to be able to see anything else in that REDCap project. You want to avoid collecting data more often than you need to because it gives you more chance for error. So if there's a field like gender that you're collecting early on in one of your forms, and then later another form what you answer kind of depends on what the gender was, you can use piping to display the value of that other field later in another form. So that's one of the nice features of REDCap that you might not always be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to move on to using surveys. So within REDCap, an instrument can be set up as a survey, and I'm not going to talk about how to do that. I'm just going to talk about how you can distribute and see what you've distributed in terms of links for the surveys. So you can set up a survey to have a public link that you can post on a website. You can email that URL to people using any email client that you have. REDCap will not keep track of what you have sent out in that regard, and and that link can be used several times. If you go within REDCap and email, let me see. Yes, okay. You can also email unique links to respondents. You can also open a survey on a device like an iPad and then hand that device off to a respondent and let them answer the survey. There is a project where that is happening. That is a means of collecting data in one of the Nemours projects. If you do this and you log into REDCap and then open the survey, you want to make sure that you log off of REDCap before you hand the iPad off. The survey will still remain open, and you'll actually have fewer problems if you log off. You can also have a survey where a REDCap user interviews a respondent and then enters the data into REDCap. What if you want to use REDCap, but there's no power, the computer's not working, the internet's down? Within REDCap, you can print a PDF format of any instrument, and then you can actually complete it on paper. You have to have the paper ahead of time before you have no power, but but you can collect on paper and then have a REDCap user enter data. And that is a less desirable method, because if it goes right into REDCap when a respondent enters, it makes less work for everybody, fewer chances of data entry errors, but it's good to have a backup system. So there is a link to a page for managing survey participants. As I mentioned before, the public survey link can be completed several times. There is also a mechanism for entering a participant list. And in this case, you enter email addresses for people, and you send, and REDCap sends a message out to each email address, and each email message has a unique link that can only be used once. And in this case, you can send it out anonymously. Now, the first one that gets entered is not anonymous because REDCap tells you that that survey was completed. But once you have several responses, you don't know which response belongs to which email address, but you just know that certain people have responded. You can also, with this option, enter an identifier, which allows you to link the data that's in responses with the email address that you've sent out. There is also a very large mechanism for sending survey invitations to participants that are within a project, and this is very helpful if you have a survey that you want somebody to do repeatedly over time, or you have several different surveys that you want people to do. A field within REDCap must be designated as an email field, and only one field can be used for that. You can't have a parent's email address and a child's email address in there. You have to just use one email address. And the invitations can be sent two ways. You can schedule an email to be sent, using defined conditions, or you can manually send the record, send the email from within REDCap. As a REDCap user, you go to the form, you go to the survey, and you send an email that way. All of these invitations are logged by REDCap, and they can be scheduled to be sent or already sent. The email invitations could already be sent, and they are in the log. The log contains the text of the email, the time that the invitation was sent, and the status of the survey response. So if somebody hasn't responded, there's a symbol with one color. If it's a partial response and completed response, it also tells you that. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is data security and some of the features that REDCap has to help keep data that's within it secure. One of the things that REDCap has is the production status, and I already mentioned that. And it's you don't want to collect real data until a project is in production status because it helps you protect your data. Once it's in production status, you will not have the freedom to recode choices in a multiple choice field and end up corrupting data. It also protects you from accidental data deletion. If you convert a checkbox field to a radio button field, you'll lose data. If you delete a field, you'll lose data. If you remove an instrument from an event in a longitudinal study, you'll lose data. And you can't do any of these things when you're in production status, so you're protected from making mistakes. There are also survey settings that would be lost if you converted a survey to a form. And you can do that when the project is in development. You can change your mind and switch back and forth, but once you're in production status, you cannot do that yourself. And when a project is in production, you can make changes. There's a process for making changes, and I'll talk about that next. But every time drafted changes go into production, a new revision of the data dictionary is stored. So you have a timeline of what changes you have made to your project that's in production. So the steps for making design changes while a project is in production is that you draft changes first. You can't test the changes that are in your project in production. So I recommend if you're making major kinds of changes or complicated changes, that you copy your project, test the changes that you want to make there, and then draft the changes in your project that's in production. Then there's a phrase, view detailed summary of all drafted changes. REDCap actually gives you a list of the changes that you've made, which can be very helpful to review. Well, did I click that or didn't I? You also have the option of removing all your drafted changes and starting over if you want to. Once you've settled on the changes that you've made or what you want to do, you want to submit those changes for review, and then an administrator will look at the drafted changes. That is mostly me. Chris does that sometimes as well. And REDCap gives us information, warnings that data might be deleted or corrupted. And so if we have see any potential problems, we talk to the REDCap user about what might be the problem, or communicate with the REDCap user about what changes, why they're making the change, and what implications it has for the data they have. Then we'll move the drafted changes to production if it's appropriate. And at that point, then you can enter data into the new fields. You have to remember that if you've marked forms as complete and you add a new field to that form will not be complete anymore. It will have an empty field. So you have to remember to go back and update all of the data that's within those new fields, or update the status of the forms. User permissions play a big role in data security. When a user has the right to change user rights within a project, They can do that if the project's in development or production. So anybody's rights to a particular project can be changed at any time. You want to try to give permissions that are just the ones that are needed. It gives things more secure. It's a little bit like PHI, only give what you need, not everything. And it also makes things less confusing, especially for a new user, because fewer options will show up in the panels. If you don't have the ability to view the, let's say, user rights, you won't have a link on the side to go there. So it gives you more what you can do and want to do in the REDCap panels. Within REDCap now, maybe not in Christiana's version if you're using an older version, but REDCap has user roles, which is very helpful in assigning some complex user rights if you have several users who are REDCap users who need the same rights in a specific project. There are some permissions that I recommend that people don't give themselves. The ability to delete and rename records is something that you could accidentally delete a record and it's gone. And if you delete, if you rename a record, you could rename it to something, a name you already have, and you really messed things up. So I recommend that people not give anybody the right to delete and rename records. But if they do need to do that, then give them the right to do it. Take the right away. And you've made the change you need to make, but you're not vulnerable to making accidental changes. The API rights is also something that people tend to give others. And this is something that typical users don't have programming skills to be able to use this. So typically, people don't need API rights. So just leave them off. And if you think that you want to use it and you're not sure, contact us and we can help you assess whether you need them or not. Now, access is given to each instrument independently. And on this slide, I have a screenshot of part of the user rights page within the version of REDCap that we have now, which is the most recent version. So I think this has been around for a long time, though. This side, the right side of the user rights page, shows what access this particular REDCap user has for these instruments. So this user that we're looking at here has the ability to add and edit a subject ID, can't do anything with identifying the information, the fields in this form, and they have the ability to edit and view a health questionnaire. If this box were checked, they would have the ability to edit responses that were given within a completed survey. So it's going back to one of the things I talked about before, it's a good idea to take PHI and put it in a separate form because you can control access to that very easily. You can have a biostatistician who doesn't need to see that, see all the other data. Or a data entry person who has a subject ID but doesn't need to know anything else about the participant, just the forms that they're entering data for. REDCap also has the ability for data access groups to be set up. This is a very useful feature from multi-institutional studies. To use this feature, you set up multiple groups, and then you assign records to each group, or to a group, and each user gets assigned to a group, and then users can only see the records for the group that they're assigned. So this way you can have two hospitals who have data for patients in the same project, but each institution can only see their own data. Each project within REDCap also has an audit log. And every operation that's performed in REDCap is logged. The time and date are logged. The REDCap username for the person who performed the action is logged. A general category of what the action is, and then a list of specific data changes or fields that were changed or exported. And the log can be filtered by type of action, username, or record. And this is very helpful for finding out who might be making a lot of mistakes, or if you have a process where you're not sure it's working or not, and you can go back and look and see what might have happened during a time that something unexpected happened. Within data entry forms, there are also data history and data comments fields that can be viewed. This is a portion of a data entry form, and there's a little H here. I don't know if you can see it, but if you click on that, you get a history of that field. And that history includes the date and time of a save, the username who did it, and the data value. So you can actually see that one data was entered, something else was entered, maybe the same one was entered again, the first one was entered again, and you can see who is doing those. There's also a little quote box here, symbol here, and when you click on that, a field comments box opens up, and anybody who has access to enter data into a project can also add a comment. So this is a useful feature for making a comment when you're changing a value. You can also see all the previous comments. So somebody might say, the mother wasn't available, so I didn't answer this at the time of the interview. You can also edit and delete comments, or you can set within REDCap on a project-specific basis that you can't edit them. So you have control over what can be done with these comments. There's also a log of the field comments, and that can be filtered according to by record identifier, event for a longitudinal study, a field, a username, a data access group, or even a keyword. And you can also require that a comment be made if a data point is being changed. So these are some handy features to use for tracking what's going on with data. And I have a couple more slides on functions that are really just for REDCap user convenience. When you have a data entry form, what it shows up at the top of that form by default is just your primary key. In this case, it's called subject ID. It could be record ID. It could be whatever you want to make that first field name. And it shows the name of that field and the value of that field. You can set up for a project that some other fields are also shown next to that ID. In this case, I'm showing last name and first name. But you can take anything that's within the any field within the database and view that on the top of every data entry form. And this also shows up in the drop-down box when you choose a record. So you can always has that primary ID there, but it will also show the values that are in the field that you set to show there. You can also turn off the today and now button for date and time field. So when you enter data into a date time field, you have this little calendar and these buttons that will populate the field with the today's value or today and this time value, and then you need to save it to get it into the database, but it's convenient to use. At times you don't want somebody to say today, so you can take that out of the fields. However, it's for the whole project, not just a specific field. It's a project per project setting. Usually when you look at records when you're selecting a record out of your drop-down box, they're ordered by your primary key in a particular order. You can have those records ordered by another field of your choice. So you might want to say all of Christiana's at the top, and then your your collaborating institution is at the bottom. So you could order by a different field. When you have the first instrument in your survey, when you have the first instrument in your project be a survey, you have to have the auto number record identifier on. So REDCap determines what the new record number will be when a survey is completed, and it's auto numbered. It uses the next incremental integer that's available when the new records are created. You can turn this off if your first instrument is not a survey, and that's very convenient because then you can use anything that you want as a record identifier. You can use a combination of letters and numbers, uppercase, lowercase. You have a more variety of things that your identifiers for your records within your project can be. Once you've used REDCap for a while, you can get lots of projects within your My Project tab, and it can be hard to find the one you're looking for. So I encourage people to use test projects to test things out, try and see if something will behave the way they want it to. You're not going to break anything. When you're done doing that, you can always delete the project. Projects that are in that have development status can be deleted. Projects that are in production status cannot be deleted by a normal user. A super user, an administrator, needs to do that. So don't worry about deleting a project unless you put a lot of work into something that you're not ready to delete. But you won't delete your data. And you can also archive projects. And when you archive a project, it moves the project off of your My Projects list as well as everybody else who has access to that project. And it ends up in a list of archived projects. And you can always show your list of archived projects, add them back to be viewed in your My Projects tab. And you can click on those and see them. You can bring them back out of the archive. You can bring them back to development status or production status, whatever status they had when they were put into archive. So that's a safe way to make your list shorter if you don't want to delete projects, but you want to be able to find what you work on regularly, more easily. Bookmarks is also a very convenient feature. Within a project within REDCap, you can set up bookmarks to show up on the left panel to other REDCap projects or to external websites. And so if you find that you're jumping back and forth between two different projects a lot, it's real convenient to have a link that takes you, a bookmark, which is a link that takes you to the other project. And I mentioned in the beginning this talk was focused on the average user, and I didn't discuss a lot of things today. I didn't discuss some creative ways to use descriptive fields. There's a new report function within REDCap that has much more capability than the old forms reports. And I didn't talk about importing and exporting data, which can be very helpful at times as well. And then there are advanced features that include the API, hooks, and plugins, where some pretty creative and useful things can be done with data that's within REDCap. But those features require programming skills and access to servers and things like that. So if anybody wants to do those, they should contact us, and we can talk about what's involved in using the API or creating hooks and plugs. REDCap was designed by Paul Harris and his group at Vanderbilt University, and there's a REDCap Consortium now, so anybody who wants any institution that wants a REDCap installation needs to join the consortium. And so all the institutions within the DE-CTR are consortium members. This consortium has over 12,000 active institutional partners, and they're in 86 countries. So this has an application that's really wide. Its use is becoming quite widespread. And the consortium uses REDCap and also supports it. So sometimes if there's a question on how to do something, somebody else may have run into the same question, and there's a discussion group of administrators for REDCap. So Paul Harris and his group and the consortium have given a lot of support and to REDCap and its users in a trickle-down kind of way. And that's the end of my talk. Are there any questions?
Are there any audit functions in REDCap? So, for example, can we get a report of anyone who has access to such project? Or something like that?
Are there, the question is, are there audit functions within REDCap so that you can see who has access to different projects? Yeah, yes. Within, if you are a super user, an administrator of REDCap, you have a control panel that allows you to see the list of everybody that's in REDCap who has a user account, when there's a record of when each user last logged in. You can also generate a list of projects that one user has access to. And that's actually very helpful if somebody says, oh, I'm having trouble with this project. I can get to their project using the control panel through the functions of accessing projects.
So I'm aware that people use REDCap a lot for survey development, and can you clarify whether people use it as a database and distinguish how it's, why we use REDCap versus just Excel spreadsheet?
So the comment was made that she's aware that REDCap can be used for surveys. What are the advantages of using it for databases and or just collecting data, and why would you want to do that? Well, REDCap can be accessed by all of the users simultaneously. So in terms of a spreadsheet versus REDCap, with a spreadsheet, you have one copy of it or multiple copies, and then you have to integrate your copies. If you use REDCap, all of your data is in one place, and you're all working on one iteration of that data. The logging within REDCap also helps you track what happened if something goes wrong somewhere along the line. And REDCap is also, the data is backed up nightly, so that if there's some kind of crisis, you can go back. It can be recovered versus on a hard drive, on a spreadsheet on a hard drive. You have control over who has access to it with the user rights as well. Did that answer all the parts of your question?
Well, I guess I have another question related to the backup. Where does the data stay? I mean, is it at Vanderbilt, or is it?
Where does the data sit? Oh, that's a good question. Is it Vanderbilt or where? Each installation of REDCap's data is stored in a place that the people who made the installation decides. So for Nemours, the Nemours instance, the data sits in a highly secure environment on the Nemours Nemours.org system. REDCap, the user functions sit outside in the DMZ so that it can be accessed, but the data sits in the back end.
Data sits in a file server that's maintained by IT, and all our forms are on a different file or a different server that's maintained by IT, both of which are inside the DMZ.
Now, there are some new types of forms that are promise forms, which are scored as they're taken, and the questions that are asked depend on the answers to previous questions. That is actually handled through Vanderbilt servers.
Standardized forms?
Specific kinds of promise forms. You can also download some promise forms from the consortium library. And when you and it depends on the type of promise form as to whether it's all in your installation or whether it's communicating with Vanderbilt. So what kinds of reports can you get out of REDCap? It's basic information. It's only data that's within REDCap that you can see within that project and within a specific project. And you can get some summary data, an average for a field, outliers. You can get a graph that show outliers for a specific field. And like I say, averages. It's how many data points are there, yeah, and how many records, so that you can actually link to something that looks like it might be an outlier. You can link to the record to actually look at the record. With the data quality module, you can set up your own rules to find fields that might be incorrectly filled. And there are already standard rules for looking for missing data.
Can you explain how you would get data out of a database project or a project database for use with SAS or R?
Yeah, so it's going to be different depending on whether you're on the most recent version or an older version. The
Rub it in.
recent change, it's very recent though. It was just September, I think, that the most recent version was released, and that included a major change to the reporting and exporting functions. But within REDCap, there's on the sidebar, you, Christiana, will have a button that says export data. I mean, a link for exporting data. That will open up a page where you can select fields or choose to export all of your fields. And once you do that, then you will be offered a chart that says that allows you to click on a link that will download your data in an Excel format or an SPSS format. So it'll be the format of the file. And for SPSS, there are two files that you get. Well, three actually. One's a path, and which we don't use because the path doesn't work for a server-based version of SPSS, though it has to be a local version for the path to work. But you download the data, the dictionary definitions in SPSS format, and this mapping. So if you have SAS locally, you can click on that mapping file and have it go into SPSS. If it's not locally, you just have to load the data and load the dictionary, but it's all defined already in SPSS. And SAS and R and Stata have similar types of functions. Yeah. And with the new reporting function, you have to go to a report and create a report for downloading the data. So it's a little bit different specific steps, but the process is the same.
And the same output in the end.
Yes, same output.
Thank you very much.